Welcome to True Crime Threads. Today we reveal a priest's shocking double life. Father Liam Owens was a man of the cloth, the kind of priest every small town dreams of having. In the tight-knit community of Brookwood, he was regarded as a beacon of hope, a constant in a world that seemed to shift too often. His gentle voice echoed through the walls of St. Michael's Church every Sunday, guiding his congregation with words that felt like a balm to their troubled souls. He spent his weekdays visiting the sick, helping families in need, and offering advice to anyone who walked through the church doors. To those who knew him, Father Liam was the epitome of a good man, kind, humble, and devoted to his faith. He had arrived in Brookwood 10 years ago, a young priest fresh out of seminary, and quickly made a name for himself as an earnest and compassionate leader. He had won over the community with his warm smile, his dedication to charity, and his ability to make everyone feel as though they were the most important person in the room. The people of Brookwood trusted him, believed in him, and considered him an irreplaceable part of their lives. In their eyes, Father Liam was more than a priest. He was a friend, a confidant, and a moral compass. They couldn't imagine a world without him. But like many things in life, appearances can be deceiving. Beneath the polished exterior of Father Liam's calm and caring persona was a man harboring dark secrets that would soon come to light in the most horrifying way. It wasn't just the Sunday sermons or the acts of charity that defined his life. There was a side to Father Liam that few could even begin to imagine. His life outside the church was a tangled web of deceit, manipulation, and criminal activities that had been carefully hidden from the public eye. It began with small things that at first seemed innocuous. He would occasionally disappear for a few days, his absence explained away as a retreat or a visit to another church. There were whispers of him being seen in places he shouldn't have been, in shady parts of town where the respectable citizens of Brookwood rarely ventured. But the rumors were fleeting, dismissed as nothing more than idle gossip or misunderstandings. After all, Father Liam had earned his place in their hearts, and no one was eager to tarnish the image of the man who had given so much to their community. It wasn't until the series of strange incidents started to occur that people began to take notice. A wave of thefts had swept through the town, starting with small items from the local shops, things that could easily be overlooked or brushed off. Expensive jewelry, electronics, and other high-ticket items started disappearing, and soon it became clear that these thefts were not random. As the local police investigated, they began to see a pattern that connected the crimes to Father Liam's sphere of influence. It wasn't just the church that he controlled, it was the entire town. The first cracks in Father Liam's perfect image appeared when Bianca Turner, a young woman who had been a volunteer at the church for nearly 2 years, went missing. She was last seen helping Father Liam with a charitable event at the church, and after that, she simply vanished. The community was frantic with worry, but no one suspected the priest. After all, Father Liam had been a mentor to Bianca, guiding her in her faith and supporting her in her personal life. It seemed unthinkable that he could be involved in anything sinister. But as the investigation into Bianca's disappearance grew more intense, something didn't add up. Father Liam's actions were beginning to raise suspicion. His alibis were weak, and there were moments when his calm demeanor seemed forced, as though he were trying too hard to appear innocent. The truth was starting to slip through the cracks, and it was only a matter of time before the secrets he had so carefully kept buried were exposed for all to see. The perfect image of Father Liam was beginning to crumble, but no one could have anticipated the shocking revelations that lay ahead. The disappearance of Bianca Turner sent shockwaves through Brookwood. She had been a familiar face at the church for years, an eager and bright volunteer who seemed to have a promising future ahead of her. Bianca was loved by everyone who knew her, especially Father Liam, who had taken a special interest in her development as both a person and a member of the church community. He often praised her dedication and willingness to help others, and many people assumed that their bond was purely spiritual and professional. But the more the investigation progressed, the more unsettling details began to surface. The night Bianca vanished, She had been helping Father Liam prepare for a charity event that was to take place the following weekend. She had mentioned in passing that she was going to meet a friend afterward, but no one could recall who that friend was. The event had gone off without a hitch, and Bianca had promised to check in with her family later that evening. But by the time her family noticed she hadn't come home, it was too late. Bianca had simply vanished, leaving behind no trace. Her phone was found on the ground near the church, but there were no messages or missed calls to suggest she was in trouble. It was as if she had disappeared into thin air. The police initially had no leads to follow. No one had seen anything out of the ordinary, and Father Liam was cooperative during questioning. He claimed he had no idea where Bianca had gone, and he seemed genuinely concerned, even offering his help in the search. He called upon the community to come together to find the missing young woman, doing everything he could to maintain the image of a concerned priest. In public, he appeared to be devastated by the disappearance, praying for Bianca's safe return during Mass and asking the congregation to join him in their collective hopes for her safety. But as the days turned into weeks and no sign of Bianca appeared, the investigation began to shift its focus. Police discovered that Bianca had confided in a few close friends about feeling uneasy around Father Liam in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She had mentioned a few strange interactions, though she had brushed them off as misunderstandings. The friends thought little of it at the time, assuming Bianca might have been overthinking things, but now, with her gone, their concerns seemed more valid. The first real breakthrough came when investigators uncovered CCTV footage from a nearby convenience store. The footage showed Father Liam's car parked in a remote part of town on the night Bianca disappeared, hours after the event had ended. The timing was significant. It had been just before Bianca was last seen leaving the church. When questioned about his whereabouts, Father Liam claimed he had been at home, praying for Bianca's safe return. But the footage told a different story. This discrepancy sent alarm bells ringing. Investigators dug deeper, looking into Father Liam's financial records and his movements in the days following Bianca's disappearance. They uncovered unusual transactions, large sums of money being transferred to accounts that didn't seem to belong to anyone connected to the church. But what truly raised suspicion was Father Liam's sudden reclusive behavior. He had become less visible in the community, avoiding reporters and staying away from the church during crucial times. His once constant presence seemed to vanish, replaced with a cold distance that only heightened the community's unease. Then, in a chilling twist, a local shopkeeper came forward with a disturbing piece of information. A few days after Bianca's disappearance, Father Liam had come into his store, purchasing cleaning supplies and a set of heavy-duty plastic sheeting. At the time, the shopkeeper hadn't thought anything of it. But now, looking back, he felt a growing sense of dread. The police now had reason to believe that Father Liam was not only involved in Bianca's disappearance, but that he might have been hiding something far darker. The image of the devout priest that had once been so ingrained in the town was starting to crack, revealing a much more sinister side. As the investigation continued, the search for Bianca turned into a search for the truth, one that no one in Brookwood was prepared for. The priest they had all trusted could no longer be seen as a man of God. Instead, he was becoming the prime suspect in a case that seemed to grow more troubling with each passing day. The investigation into Father Liam deepened when the police received an anonymous tip that led them to a hidden cellar beneath St. Michael's Church. The cellar had been a mystery to most of the town. It was a part of the old church, sealed off long ago and rarely mentioned. No one ever thought to question its existence. The church had always been a place of worship, a sanctuary where the community felt safe and secure. The idea that there was something secret hidden beneath the very place they had trusted so much seemed impossible. But when the tip came in, the police couldn't ignore it. They made their way to the church in the dead of night, determined to investigate this lead. The atmosphere was heavy with anticipation as they descended into the darkness beneath the church, where the smell of musty stone filled the air. The officers cautiously approached a rusted door at the far end of the basement, which had been locked for as long as anyone could remember. The padlock was old, its metal corroded from years of neglect, but with little effort, the officers broke it open. The moment the door creaked open, the investigators were hit with a sense of dread. The room was cold and dimly lit, the only source of light coming from a single bulb hanging above them. But as their eyes adjusted, they began to make out the horrifying details that had been concealed for so long. The cellar was far from an ordinary storage area. It was a carefully constructed hideaway. Along the walls were shelves filled with stolen items, many of which had been reported missing from local businesses in recent weeks. Expensive electronics, jewelry, and cash filled the shelves, but it wasn't just the stolen goods that made the investigators' blood run cold. There were also items that didn't belong: strange tools, ropes, and an assortment of other materials that suggested something more sinister was at play. On one side of the room, the officers found a collection of photographs pinned to the wall. Each photograph was of a woman, some familiar to the townspeople, others unknown. The faces of these women stared back at the investigators, frozen in time. Among them was Bianca Turner. The photo of her was marked with a date and a note in Father Liam's handwriting, though the message made no sense at first glance. The other women were similarly cataloged, each with a series of notes and scribbled details that suggested they had been part of something far darker than anyone had imagined. As the investigators combed through the room, they discovered more unsettling details. In one corner there were stacks of cash, dirty and old, as though it had been hidden away for a long time. Nearby they found boxes filled with documentation that detailed financial transactions linked to some of the town's most influential residents, names of people who had been involved in illicit dealings, some of whom had long-standing connections to the church. It seemed that Father Liam had been running a criminal operation right under the nose of the community, hiding his activities behind his position as the revered priest. But what struck the investigators the most was a large, heavy-duty plastic tarp and a set of industrial cleaning supplies which were scattered across the room as if they had been used recently. The items were positioned near a trapdoor in the floor, which led to a deeper section of the cellar. Beneath this floor was another room, dark and foreboding. The police hesitated for a moment, but they knew they had to continue. As they pried open the trapdoor, they found remnants of soil, evidence that something had recently been buried in the earth below. This discovery was the final piece of the puzzle. Father Liam had been hiding in plain sight, using his role as a man of the church to conceal his twisted activities. The photographs, the stolen goods, the hidden room, it all pointed to a man who had carefully orchestrated a criminal enterprise under the guise of helping others. It was a revelation that turned the town's perception of Father Liam upside down. The community had trusted him, believing he was their spiritual guide, their protector. Now they realized that the priest they had confided in and respected was living a life of crime, manipulating and exploiting the very people who had put their faith in him. The man who had been seen as a beacon of hope was, in reality, the mastermind of a dark, underground operation. The full scale of Father Liam's deception was just beginning to unfold, and it left the town of Brookwood in a state of shock and disbelief. As the investigation into Father Liam deepened, the unsettling truth began to unravel, revealing a web of deception that extended far beyond what anyone could have anticipated. The discovery of the hidden cellar beneath the church was just the beginning. As investigators continued to probe deeper into Father Liam's life, they uncovered a series of connections and patterns that painted a picture of a man who had manipulated his position for years, using it to orchestrate a network of criminal activity that stretched throughout the town and beyond. It wasn't just the stolen goods, drugs, and weapons that were found in the cellar. It was the way in which Father Liam had seamlessly woven himself into the fabric of the town. Many of the local businesses that had been victimized by theft or fraud had dealings with the church, some even making donations in exchange for what they believed was Father Liam's goodwill. The more the authorities looked into these relationships, the more it became clear that Father Liam had used his influence as the trusted priest to create a network of people who either willingly or unknowingly aided him in his criminal activities. The financial transactions uncovered in the hidden room pointed to a system of money laundering that had been going on for years. Father Liam had been siphoning funds through the church's charity programs, funneling money from unsuspecting donors into secret accounts that were linked to his personal dealings. Many of the town's wealthiest residents, some of whom had attended the church regularly, had unknowingly contributed to this illicit scheme. Father Liam had convinced them to make large donations to various church causes, which in turn were funneled into his own pockets or used to fund the criminal operation he was running under the radar. The true scope of his crimes began to take shape, and it was far more extensive than anyone had imagined. His involvement in human trafficking, something that had never even crossed the minds of the townspeople, was also uncovered. Bianca Turner, it seemed, had been more than just a victim of a missing person case. She had been a part of something darker, something far more sinister than anyone had believed. Bianca had been used by Father Liam as a pawn in a larger game, recruited into his criminal network without even realizing the full extent of what she had been dragged into. As investigators spoke with more people from Father Liam's past, disturbing details emerged. Several women came forward, all of them victims of manipulation, exploitation, and even physical threats. Some had been coerced into working for Father Liam under the guise of charitable work, while others had been lured by promises of financial stability or a sense of belonging. Many of these women had been pushed into the criminal underworld, where they became part of the network Father Liam had carefully cultivated. Some had even been involved in smuggling or transporting stolen goods, while others had been used to hide the illicit operations from the authorities. It wasn't just the women who had been affected. The web of lies Father Liam had spun extended to countless individuals, all of whom had been deceived into believing they were doing good in the world. People who had been financially supporting the church, thinking they were helping those in need, were now left grappling with the harsh reality that they had unwittingly funded a criminal empire. The more the investigation dug into Father Liam's life, the more the truth began to surface. His public persona as a kind and selfless priest was a carefully constructed facade, masking a much darker and more calculating nature. Those who had been close to him, including his fellow clergy members, were shocked to learn of his double life. Some had suspected that something was off, but no one had ever dared to question the priest they had known for so long. Father Liam had carefully silenced any doubts, using his position of power to maintain control over everyone around him. The town of Brookwood was in shock. The priest they had trusted for so many years was a criminal mastermind, using the church as a front for his illegal operations. The community's sense of safety and trust had been shattered. People who had once turned to Father Liam for comfort now found themselves questioning every interaction they had ever had with him. How could they have been so blind to the man behind the collar? As the investigation continued, it became increasingly clear that Father Liam's actions were not just about greed or power. They were a calculated attempt to manipulate and control the lives of those around him. He had used his position not only for financial gain but also to exploit the very people who had placed their faith in him. The deeper the authorities dug, the more disturbing the revelations became, and it became evident that Father Liam had orchestrated a web of crime that no one could have predicted. It was a tragic fall from grace for a man who had once been seen as a pillar of the community, and the town of Brookwood would never be the same again. The final chapter of Father Liam's story unfolded with a shocking, yet inevitable, conclusion. As investigators closed in on the priest, the facade that he had so carefully constructed for years began to crumble entirely. The media frenzy surrounding the case escalated as more details were uncovered, and the truth behind Father Liam's double life was laid bare for the entire town of Brookwood to see. People were horrified, not just by his crimes, but by the extent to which he had manipulated everyone around him. The sense of betrayal was palpable. The man they had trusted with their most intimate fears and prayers had been living a lie, a dangerous, deceptive life that had wreaked havoc on everyone in his path. It became clear that Father Liam had been a master of deception. He had used the very church that was meant to offer solace and sanctuary as a means of control. He had preyed on vulnerable individuals, using their trust to further his own criminal agenda. But what was perhaps most disturbing was the realization that Father Liam had no remorse for his actions. Throughout the investigation, he maintained his calm demeanor, never once showing guilt or regret for the pain he had caused. It was as though, in his eyes, his actions had been justified by the control he held over the community. In the days following the discovery of the cellar, Father Liam was arrested at the church, where he had once been revered. His arrest was the culmination of weeks of painstaking investigation, and it came as a relief to the townspeople, who were finally able to confront the man who had shattered their sense of safety. Father Liam was charged with multiple counts of theft, money laundering, human trafficking, and murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His years of manipulation, his carefully hidden crimes, and his twisted hold on the town's resources left no room for doubt. He had been running a criminal empire, all while hiding behind the cloak of his priestly role. The trial was a media spectacle, with news outlets from all over the country covering the shocking case. The courtroom was filled with former parishioners, some of whom still couldn't fully accept the man they had once admired being guilty of such heinous crimes. But as the trial progressed and the details of Father Liam's actions were presented, it became impossible for anyone to ignore the reality of his double life. Witnesses took the stand, recounting stories of exploitation, manipulation, and fear. Many of them had been so deeply affected by Father Liam's actions that they could barely bring themselves to testify. As more victims came forward, the full extent of Father Liam's depravity was revealed. The town of Brookwood had been a puppet in his twisted game, and no one had seen the strings pulling them along. His manipulation had been subtle, drawing people in with his kindness and charm, only to use them for his own benefit. The trauma suffered by his victims, particularly the women he had coerced into his web of crime, was almost unimaginable. Some had spent years trapped in his control, believing they were doing good by helping the church, only to realize too late that they had been pawns in a much larger, far more sinister operation. The impact of Father Liam's crimes was felt across the community. The church, once a place of peace and refuge, became a symbol of corruption and deceit. The people who had placed their trust in him now had to rebuild their lives, their faith shattered by the man who had once been their rock. The town of Brookwood, once a close-knit community, was left in disarray. Friendships were broken, families torn apart, and the very foundations of trust had been shattered. Father Liam was ultimately found guilty on all charges. The trial had been a long, painful process, but the town could finally begin to heal. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, but the damage he had caused could not be undone. Father Liam's legacy would forever be one of manipulation, betrayal, and destruction. His once gilded image would be remembered only for the darkness that lurked beneath it. In the aftermath of the trial, the community of Brookwood began the difficult task of rebuilding. People tried to find comfort in their faith, though the wounds left by Father Liam's betrayal would take years to heal. The town would never be the same, but in time they learned to move forward, never forgetting the lessons learned from the man who had hidden his crimes behind the veil of trust and faith. Father Liam's story was a reminder of the dangers of blind trust, the importance of questioning authority, and the deep scars left by those who exploit the vulnerable. It was a tale that would linger in the hearts and minds of the townspeople for generations to come.